Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to BCSD Insights, the Learning and Leading podcast, where we promote district initiatives and provide valuable learning opportunities for our staff, parents, and community members.
We're your hosts. I'm Brandon Broughton.
And I'm Ryan Lanigan. And today we are diving into an important topic, which is how parents can support their children's academic and personal growth, specifically when it comes to understanding and using grades as a tool for learning. Joining us today to help us unpack this is Dr. Heather Lyon, an experienced educator and author with expertise in student engagement and effective grading practices. Welcome, Dr. Lyon, and thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Would you mind sharing with us a little bit about your background and why we're speaking with you today?
Sure. I like to tell people now that I've been in education since the turn of the century. I started out as an English teacher. I got my master's in reading and then have been in administration for nearly 20 years now. I have written 3 books on engagement and support districts across the state in areas related to grading and assessment, including Brockport. So it's exciting to be able to be here. I also am a mom. I have 3 children myself. Right now they're 18, 16, and 14. So I can see this from both sides.
That's excellent. And your background will be very helpful in this. So to start, let's start exploring grading systems. So many of our parents encounter different formats, letters, grades, numbers, percentages, even standard-based reporting. It can be very confusing and really a daunting task for parents to really know how their children are doing. What would you say are some of the best ways for parents to understand these systems?
I think the best way to understand is to develop a relationship with your child's teachers, because if there's a system that they're unfamiliar with, it's really important for parents to ask questions. Educators are here to help, and we understand the systems that we're using. But you spoke about standards-based grading. And so our elementary families tend to be most familiar with standards-based grading. And basically, standards-based grading doesn't necessarily mean that you would see the language that New York State says is the standard, but it's generally a parent-friendly interpretation of what the New York State standard is. And that's the goal that we want the students to know and be able to do, and where the child is in relation to their attainment of that goal. And that tends to be on a scale that is generally a 1, 2, 3, or 4. I know I'm working with the elementary team in Brockport to take a deeper look at your standards-based grading scale and all of that. So I encourage the families to be on the lookout for some updates related to that work. More familiar to most of our families is how they were graded when they were in school, and it tends to be a 0 to 100 point scale of averages. Most families really have a deep understanding, or at least familiarity with that scale. What's interesting about it, and why even though we're most familiar with it, it may not be the most effective tool to communicate a student's learning, is because if a child gets a 0 on one assignment and they get 100 on another assignment, and then you average those 2 things together, it makes it look like the child is a 50. Well, that's the average of those 2 scores, but that doesn't mean that that 50 represents what that child knows and is able to do now. And so the average can be actually very misleading, because one low score can negate a series of higher scores. And depending on when that lower score happens in the sequence of the learning, it may also be misleading as to what the child knows now.
And so how do we work in a system where we're really helping our parents, but really our students as well, to understand growth, right? Like, we want them to start somewhere, but we want them to finish here. How are we getting that progress? Because thinking even myself as a parent, having an elementary a student, even middle school student, when they may be struggling in an area where they start against the standard. They may not be proficient against the standard by the end, but they've shown a lot of growth, and that teacher has done an amazing job with them. How do we really help to get parents to understand that maybe they're not proficient according to what the state says, but every day they're working hard and their teacher is doing all the things they need to promote that growth within the student, and they're becoming closer to that standard.
I like to use analogies. I'm known for my use of analogies. And with this, it makes me think about athletes. So when I was in high school, I played volleyball my junior and senior year. And I can't remember which year, but one of those years I got the most improved player award. It's because I grew the most in comparison to my peers on the team, but I was definitely not the most valuable player on the team. And so your question is really digging at the difference between being the most valuable player on the team, i.e. the kid who gets, the hundreds or, the A's or does exceptionally well, versus the kid who comes in and they may not be as strong and they may not end at the A or the 100, but they've definitely grown a lot. I think both are important. The reality is that our best students often show the least amount of growth, in part because they're so close to being successful, or they already are successful. So I think it's just as important for parents of students who are already doing well to ask of their children's teachers, how is my child being challenged? Because I expect my child to grow at least a year during a school year.
Mhm.
And that should be something that is expected for all of our students. The students who may not be the 100 kids, the A kids, or the sticking with the analogy, the most valuable players get that award on the team. We want to establish what is it they know and are able to do now, what would growth look like for them, and work towards that. So it's not one or the other, it's both and.
Right. Thank you.
Heather, you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about just the fact that sometimes we grade a little differently than what parents are used to, especially in the elementary. Any pointers or tips or priorities that you think parents should be paying attention to when they do look at grades, when they do look at report cards? What's going to help them to really get a picture of their child's success and areas of growth?
When I have helped revise report cards countless number of times with districts, like I said, all over. And the feedback that I hear most often from parents is that they focus most on the comments than any other aspect of the report card. I think in part it's because it's very personalized, you hope. And then the second reason is because sometimes the scales are confusing to parents. Um, so I would say to parents, again, it goes back to that relationship that you have with the teacher. And I my oldest son, when he was in seventh grade, he had the opportunity to take an advanced math pathway that would prepare him to then take algebra his eighth grade year. And I had communicated to the school that my son had ADHD, that he was impulsive, had trouble keeping himself organized, but that he was very bright. And I found out that, long story short, that he had the opportunity to take the advanced math pathway. All I needed to do was to let them know that that was something that we were interested in. So when I did that, I reached out and I was told, well, your son is actually failing seventh grade math right now, which was surprising to me because as a middle school parent, I was going into the parent portal regularly to look and see how he was doing. And in the parent portal, he was passing. So, but anyway, the teacher asked me, does your son have trouble with responsibility and organization? And I said, I actually told you that at the beginning of the year. What I need to know is how my child is as a mathematician. Can he handle the math? And because as a parent, I don't know if he can handle the math. I know who he is in terms of his executive functioning, but not in terms of his mathematics. And I think that's what parents are looking for from teachers. And they shouldn't be afraid to ask those questions, both in terms of the executive functioning skills, those soft skills, is your child being respectful? Is your child being responsible, and so forth? But also, parents want to know more than, is my child a pleasure to have in class? And if you don't know as a parent and the communication on the report card isn't communicating that, there is nothing wrong with picking up the phone or sending an email or sending in a note or whatever. Teachers are here in support of the kids and their families, and are not at all inconvenienced or otherwise put off by a family asking a question about their child. Set up a time for a conference. Have the child be present for that, because the child can develop agency and advocacy in that process as well. And at a certain point, you want your child actually to have that agency and advocacy so that the baton is being passed. Because, like I said, I have an 18, 16, and 14-year-old, and I keep, as much as sometimes I would want to reach out to my oldest son's college professors and ask, how's he doing? That just would not fly.
Right.
Part of
That's
that
very
growth
true.
process you were talking about before. Yeah, definitely. You want to have kids evolve into taking on a bigger role with that.
Thinking about parents, and I know you just said you wanted to reach out potentially to your son's college professors, which probably isn't the right thing to do, but what are the best ways for parents to approach teachers? I know you said make a phone call, send an email, but
Yep.
what advice would you have for families to how best to start that communication so that it is productive and a constructive conversation to really make sure that from your view as the parent, and then making sure the teacher is very clear on what you're asking of them?
I think it is important for parents to create the dynamic for their child that the teacher and the parent are on the same page. That is huge, because sometimes kids can try to steer a parent in a direction that is not really as accurate as the way that they are saying. I take what my own children say with a grain of salt. So, if I look in the parent portal and I see something, and again, this happened when my child was in middle school. Um, uh, I saw something and it was a 0, and I said to my child, help me understand the 0. And the child said, well, the teacher wouldn't take the work. I did reach out to the teacher, but I did it in a way that was very curious and humble, rather than accusatory or aggressive. It was, I'm confused. I'm looking here. My child told me that he did the work, but he's telling me that you didn't accept the work. I'd love to learn more about that and how we can support my child's success. We're a team, the school and the parent. And as much as I recognize what it's like to be on the educator side, because I am an educator, I also recognize what it's like to be on the other side and to position it in such a way that we're a team working together. We both have the best interest of my child in mind. So I know that we are going to be able to work through this. And quite honestly, in that experience, the response that the teacher gave me, just as an example, was one that I didn't necessarily agree with how the teacher was approaching the grading. But in this case, it wasn't my job to tell the teacher, I think your grading system is flawed. But it is my job as my child's parent to help my child understand, regardless of the flaws in the system, if there are any, you need to know the rules of the game here. And so if the teacher's expectation is that you turn in your work before your band lesson, otherwise it counts as a 0, then you need to be responsible and do that. Doing the work is not sufficient. You need to do the work and turn it in at the expected time. And so again, I don't necessarily agree with that approach, because he did the work and the grade should reflect his knowledge of the content, not his behaviors around turning that in. But that's not between myself and the teacher, or myself and my child. That's just a personal feeling that I have. And so I need to help my child be successful within the parameters that he has.
Let's
Great.
talk a little more about that, Heather, that side of the balance as a parent of, you want to promote that growth mindset with kids. You don't want to necessarily put undue pressure on kids, but how do you talk with your child about their grades or their progress? And what are some effective strategies as far as bringing that into conversations with your child as you're getting those grades and reviewing report cards and things like that?
Um, Again, I love an analogy. So a few years ago, I decided that I wanted to become a little bit healthier. And so I got an app that was really connected to thoughtful eating and monitoring and, what not to lose weight. And one of the things that it said to do actually was advice that I had thought was not correct, which is it said to weigh yourself daily. And honestly, the reason it said that is so that you could course correct, so that if one day the scales tipped really high because of what you ate the day before, you have the opportunity to do something about that in an immediate manner. As a parent, I take that as I'm going to go into, especially when my kids are in middle school, because there's a big shift from elementary school to middle school regarding grades typically.
Mhm.
So in elementary school with standards-based grading, they're not getting an average. They're not failing, in the same way that the average on a report card of a 0 to 100 is impactful. So I actually sat down with my children prior to going into middle school, like, August before they start middle school, to talk to them about how the grading system works in middle school, so that I could explicitly talk them through mathematically how that worked, because they need to know the expectations of the rules. But then I would go into the parent portal on a weekly basis. So on Fridays, I would go in there, look and see what are they doing well? Where are they dropping off, if they're dropping off? And then I would have conversations with my kids. I would want them there actually with me, to say, what are we going to celebrate? And where, if any, where are there areas that we should spend focus? By we, I mean them. Um, but the reason that I did it weekly is because I wanted to stay in front of it if there was a problem. So time is on your side when it comes to this. And if there is a grade that is something that needs to be investigated or discussed, I'd rather do it as soon as possible, because the more time goes by, the less likely that people are going to remember exactly what that was, that, all of the logistics that go into it. So I would say, as children transition from elementary school to middle school, parents tend to be pretty involved in elementary school and tend to take a step back as children progress to middle school. And I would say middle school is actually not the time to take a step back. It's time to take a different step. And then as a child transitions to high school, I still kept up that same cadence initially, particularly in that freshman year. But now I'm very unlikely to reach out to the teacher by the time my child gets into high school. Not that I've not that I am not paying attention, but I am now transitioning my child to be the driver of that. So I would have conversations with my child like, hey, I'm seeing what's happening here or whatever. And, my child tells me whatever it is my child tells me. And I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, well, I'm going to expect that that grade is going to change, or if that grade doesn't change, um, you and I might have to schedule a time to meet with, the teacher or something like that. So, but I'm asking my child, what's your plan of action for that grade to go up?
So you're basically helping with that advocacy, right? Like it's that transitioning. So I like that you said you take that different step, not a step back in middle school, but then in high school, you're still actively involved, but it's a little more behind the scenes. It's a little more making sure that your child, the student is advocating with the teacher to make those adjustments as needed, and then getting involved if that isn't going and making the moves that need to happen for your child to be successful.
That's right.
Um, yeah, so we've talked a little bit about some misconceptions or common misconceptions about grading already during this, but can you talk to us a little bit about what are the things that parents most often may misunderstand and need to know about? Like what are those tips, for parents that they might, what are the common misconceptions?
Um, I think when we went to school, homework was king. And that's not necessarily the case anymore in terms of how grades are calculated. The reason that homework has really been minimized in a grade calculation is, I mean, there are so many different reasons. Who's to say who did the homework? Quite honestly. And homework is really should be the practice of the learning. And just like we don't score kids at soccer practice, we score them at the game. We want to know how they do in the game. Homework should be positioned in a similar manner. That the homework is really practice that helps us to be successful on the assessments that we have. So that's not to say that doing homework is not as important as it was before to the learning. It's always important to the learning. It just may not be as important to the grade. So I would encourage parents to focus both on how students are doing in terms of the practice of the learning, the homework, or these other pieces of information, as well as how are they doing on assessments of the learning, like tests and quizzes. And if there's a discrepancy, that's a great place for a conversation, starting with the child, and also involving the teachers. I think some other big misconceptions about grades that parents should have um, is that I this one I hate to say, but it's true that the grade is valid and reliable because it isn't always. And by valid and reliable, I mean that we're measuring the actual standards. Unfortunately, it's often the case that the things that we're scoring are not necessarily directly aligned to standards. So, for example, if a child turns in something late and they're penalized in terms of their grade for that assignment, if the assignment would have been 100, but now it's an 80 because 20 points were taken off because it's late, that's actually not a reflection of the student's knowledge of the standards. So that makes it invalid. And so I don't want parents to walk away from this being suspicious of grades, but I do want them to walk away from this um, recognizing that they should be curious about the grades. So, and there's a difference between being suspicious and being curious.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think like, so when you say that, what I think we want to really make sure is, um, and it's been going on forever in education and it's human nature is, often we want to reward, hard work and we
Yes.
want to acknowledge other things, but sometimes we don't understand when we make decisions about what's going into a student's grade, to give another analogy, when you drop a pebble in a pond, what are the ripples that happen from that? And so, for example, I can think of scenarios where, a student may be in a course showing a grade that is at mastery. So let's say we're saying an 85 or higher shows that a student really has a strong grasp of the content, the standards, right? That's what we would like to believe. However, if what we may not realize or what we need to be aware of is, is there test corrections? Do the teachers allow for extra credit, or do the teachers allow for other opportunities for kids to redo, make up work, get bonus points? And so all of a sudden, if you have a kid who's staying after school and they're taking advantage of all those opportunities, they're meeting with the teachers during different periods of the day, like their advisement time. And all of a sudden they're showing that mastery of standards. And then the end of the year culminating assessment comes. And in our state, it's the Regents exams, and they fail the Regents and get a 62. Then at that point, the parent may be very concerned of, wait a minute, my kid was showing
Right.
an 85 to 90 average all year, which to my knowledge was mastery of what they needed to know to take this assessment, yet they didn't pass the assessment, because we're
Yeah.
not necessarily taking into account that their behavior was impacting the number. So I think that's why curious is the right word, not suspicious, because
Right.
nobody is doing those things with any kind of ill intent. But these are the things that happen sometimes, because all of it's important, right? Like when we talk about this, all of that matters. Kids being able to meet deadlines is an important life skill. Kids being able to show resilience and continue wanting to, reinvest and really have a desire to learn and grow. Making sure they're taking care of business. But it doesn't always equate to showing what they know.
Mhm.
And is that really the fundamental purpose of what we're doing here?
I would be remiss if I didn't say a couple of things in this moment. The first is that Brockport is doing really important work related to grading and assessment and trying to increase the validity and reliability of grades. So, Brockport has a seat at the table for parents who want to be a part of the conversation, both in terms of what's happening right now and what could happen in the future. The second thing is there is a lot of conversation out there about the Blue Ribbon Commission and the potential of Regents exams and what's happening with them in the future. And I just want all parents to understand that Regents exams are not going away.
Yeah.
How they are being used by the state in terms of graduation may change, emphasis on may, but that has not been decided. So nobody should, be talking with their children right now about, oh, that Regents exam doesn't even matter, because it does. And so that's important in this moment to just put out there.
Well, yeah, and even if the state where we're going, and certainly we will be communicating with families as we get more information
Yeah.
from the state education department. However, at this point, yes, maybe there may be some changes, but depending on what the students' post-secondary aspirations are, exams are still going to be a piece, right?
That's
And
right.
so we have to be mindful of that, and we still need to make sure that we are doing our very best to make sure that we are doing a comprehensive look at how we assess and how we report student achievement. And really, we want to focus on the whole child. So the behavior pieces are important. Those attributes of what we want our graduates to have beyond academic content is essential as well. But we want to make sure that there's a place, there's an area for both. And so what
Yes.
that looks like could and will evolve probably over the next few years. But this is important work, and we want our families to be our partners within this work.
I think it's
One more.
important
Oh,
also. Oh, go ahead, Heather. I was just
no,
going to say, I think
no.
it's also important to think holistically about your child. What are they involved in extracurriculars? What are some of the soft skills that they have that maybe don't necessarily always come out in content grades, but are really important for employability in the future? And it's important for parents just to have that holistic view of your child. Grades are a piece of that, but what are they doing with their time in addition to their studies that's gainful for them? And cultivating some of those soft skills or just work habits that will help them across a lot of different areas in their life, I think are really important. Don't always come out in grades. So it's just something to be mindful of and be thoughtful about the fact that there's more to your child's educational experience than just the grades, and that holistic piece of it and having that lens for that. You're going to see a lot of I think growth with your child and successes there too. And just don't miss those things along the way.
That's really an important piece and one that I write a lot about in my work on engagement, that to really think about um, not just the whole child, but the whole person, right? So it's not just, is your child doing well academically, but is your child doing well in terms of, do they have friends? Do they have hobbies? Do they have interests and things like that? Because school is a wonderful space for children to explore um, aspects beyond the classroom as well. I do want to say, going back to how can parents support their children, that piece of things, that I should have also said that this starts at the youngest of ages, pre-K and kindergarten, because the the environment that is created in the house around school and learning has a direct impact on how the child does in school. So is there a quiet place for your child to read and study and complete work? Is this something that there are routines potentially created so the child knows, oh, when I come home, I get a snack, I get to play for an hour, but I need to start working on my homework,
Mhm.
at this time. That type of thing. So having those routines and practices in place starting young means
Mhm.
that they become um, a part of what happens as the child progresses throughout school, and more homework and at home work becomes a part of the expectation.
Mhm.
Heather, in closing today, are there any resources or things that you think that parents could look up or would benefit from if they did a Google search, or that we could provide attached to the this podcast when it airs?
I'm gonna find a couple things and share them with you so that way you can link it to the podcast. But quite honestly, the most important, I would say there are two really important things parents can do. Going back to, again, that creating structures and routines and culture around learning within their house just goes a long way. And then the second most important thing is to create a team relationship between the family and the school. Um, and so that the children understand that the parents and the teachers, principals, et cetera, are all on the same team and there to support the kids.
Great. Um, and to our listeners, we will certainly be posting those resources. But Dr. Lyon, thank you so much today for your time. This was a great conversation. We know this is very valuable and important. It is something, as you had stated in the podcast, that the school district is working hard to make sure that we are thoughtful and continuing to evolve and grow, and bringing our parents in as partners, the families and parents that have been a part of our discussions around grading, their contribution, and our students at the secondary level, their contributions have been extremely valuable in making sure that all perspectives are being taken. So thank you so much
Mhm.
today. We really appreciate your time and being with us. So
Yeah.
with that, Mr. Broughton, anything to add?
No, thank you, Dr. Lyon. We appreciate your insight. And as we said, continue to monitor your children's grades, stay on top of that, but also encourage them to explore their passions, encourage them to take on challenges, and try to roll that growth mindset into your conversations with your kids, because that's going to create that partnership at home, which you want as well. You want that school partnership. You also have to have that partnership with your child, where they see you as a partner in a team effort, where sometimes you do have to, to get on your child, but you want them to see you as part of a partnership that really is helping them to be successful as well.
Thanks for having me.
We're glad you could do it. And to our listeners, if you have any questions or there are topics you would want us to cover in future episodes, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you for tuning in to BCSD Insights, the Learning and Leading podcast. Until next time, keep learning and growing together. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye.